Hello, beautiful people, and welcome, to the Arlecchino post-release analysis. As usual for these, we're going to go through the pre-release, go through everything we got right, everything we got wrong, everything we missed. Let's get right into it. The biggest upside is that her damage is very, very front-loaded. And what that means is once you reach pretty high investment, things will die before the damage fall off. We'll talk about attack combos later, but for now, let's just assume you're doing 2 and 6 into N4. You're finishing with 31% bond of life. Now, you could use your ult, clear the bond, do a bit of damage, heal for 50% of that, and 150% of your attack. So somewhere between like 5 and 9k, depending on buffs and all that stuff. Or you don't. And if you don't, this 31.95% bond of life stays there. Maybe it doesn't disappear when you swap out. It stays on her. So what you can do is use your E and start your next rotation. And then on the next rotation, we're going back, but we're gaining 130. And so our first hit is decent amount stronger. In other words, you get rewarded for not needing to use your burst to heal. And you get rewarded for that by getting more damage. Yeah, so this is indeed the case, and it's something that feels really good in practice. Whenever you don't have to burst, whenever you can carry over some bond of life, starting the next rotation with more bond of life feels really significant. It's definitely something that like noticeably increases your damage, and at like the sort of investment that you'd expect, or that I generally expect out of the average asterisk player, and in this situation, average is like not actually the median player, because there's a lot of people that play the game way too casually to care about builds, right? But the average player who will look up a guide to figure out how to build a character. I expect them to be able to have, if they've been playing for long enough investment to be able to like to rotate content like single target bosses if they do their rotations right. And when you can to rotate with her, especially because right, generally you don't kill them after the full rotation, it's after a certain amount of damage, and if most of your damage is front loaded, then that happens earlier into your rotation than if your damage is sustained. So all of this is like in practice, this matters a lot, and it definitely helps her feel a lot better for a lot of people. Another upside of that is, well, if you don't need to burst, that means you don't need ER. That being said though, I didn't go through all the downsides yet. So let's go through a few more. Okay, before we get into that, one more thing I want to add about front-loaded damage is I've seen a few theory crafters be surprised at how positive the reception to Arlecchino has been. And I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. Because of the way that her front-loaded damage works, if you are someone who cares a lot about the meta, min-maxes their characters as much as possible, and gets really strong builds, a character with a damage profile this front-loaded will perform better, even if your overall DPS isn't as good. On the other hand, if you're someone who doesn't care as much about min-maxing, isn't as much into the meta, you're a lot more likely to fall victim to damage per screenshot, and to see one big number and be like, oh my god, this character is broken. In other words, for like very optimized players, Arlecchino is very good, and for non-optimized players, she kind of isn't, but she looks very good, so they still think she is very good. The players for which Arlecchino isn't quite as good are the players who won't notice her weaknesses as much. Anyways, let's keep going. Her charge attack does not benefit from the Mask of the Red Death increase. In other words, her charge attack is really bad. Before we keep going with this, alright, let's expand a little bit on charge attack being really bad. Yes, it is really bad. However, there is one thing about the charge attack that I think a lot of people aren't aware of yet, and it's that while you are forced to use a charge attack to consume your mark, you don't actually have to hit enemies with a charge attack, and you don't actually have to finish your charge attack animation. In other words, you can do this, and you get your bond of life. You can dash cancel or jump cancel it, and that can actually be useful because since the charge attack doesn't do that much damage, actually landing it doesn't matter that much. And against aggressive enemies, sometimes, well, you have to wait for them to stop attacking to start attacking them. Like against Triple Kenki, for example, they do like a series of attacks, and it can be hard to find a good window to slot in your charge attack. But when you're doing charge attack and dash canceling it, the animation is a lot shorter, so it's a lot easier to slot it in. Outside of that, canceling your charge attack like this can be really useful in specific teams where it can otherwise be difficult to apply enough hydro, or even cryo, depending on your team, to keep up with Arlecchino's pyro application. For example, when you're using Kokomi as a source of hydro application for Arlecchino, and we'll get into her hydro teammates later, don't worry, because I don't think I ended up mentioning Kokomi in the pre-release, so that's something we gotta address. But if you are using Kokomi as a source of hydro application for Arlecchino, you'll generally go Bennett, Anemo, or zhongli Bennett into Kokomi. So you'll use Kokomi's E when the enemies are affected by pyro. What that means is, especially in AoE, you have to either do a charge attack or wait for Kokomi's jellyfish to hit a second time for the enemies to have a hydro aura. If you don't do that, you go on Arlecchino, you start hitting them, you apply a pyro aura, you're not gonna vape any of your stuff. You're just gonna be vaping Kokomi and it's not gonna be good. Doing a charge attack cancel lets you consume your bond without applying pyro, which gives Kokomi's jellyfish enough time to apply hydro a second time and start with a hydro aura, and then you can start hitting them without a worry. It's also useful if you have C2 Arlecchino. You get additional damage when you consume your mark, but the damage hits after the charge attack does, which means that if you only have a small amount of hydro left on enemies, the charge attack will vape and the C2 damage won't. And if you are trying to play a melt team, the charge attack will melt and the C2 won't. Because the charge attack is like 180 at talent level 10 motion value and the C2 is 900, you can see how that would not be ideal. And so you can decide to just do a charge attack cancel, consume the C2 mark, and get your damage. If your source of hydro application isn't that fast in vape teams, like if you're not doing a charge attack cancel at C2, because you get application from your charge attack and then your C2, and that's generally going to wipe a hydro aura as long as it's not to you, which it generally won't be. And then you normal attack, but your normal attack will hit before your rain swords do or your exquisite throws do or whatever, which means they're going to have a pyro aura, which means you're going to miss your first vape, and your first vape is obviously your biggest hit, so you don't want to miss that. And then you might even miss more depending on how slow your hydro app is. Yeah, that's fair. I'm seeing a message in chat. It is worth noting that if your charge attack doesn't hit, you do not get the signature weapon bonus. Keep that in mind if you have her signature. Anyways, let's keep going. And then finally, last part of her kit. When defeating an opponent with a Blood Dead Directive, Arlecchino will be granted a life bond worth 130% of her max HP. And so the purpose of this passive is to make it so that if you do kill the enemy during your setup, you still get the Bond of Life. Okay, this is true, but one thing to add to that is in multi-wave content, it can happen pretty often that you get your E back before your uptime is over. And if you notice that you're about to kill an enemy while you have your E up, you can make sure to use your E. And especially in AoE content, that can, I'd say a bit more often than I expected, get you 145 instead of 130. So let's take a look at the overall list. Looking at this very quickly, I don't think I've changed my mind on anything. I guess I'm a little bit less positive on Lithic now, but that's mainly because I dislike the teams that have multiple Leo unit a little bit more than I expected to. So it still does vary from garbage to great, but I think I may have been a bit too positive on it. But yeah. We've gone through her kit, we know what her burst does, and her burst, unless you need the healing, doesn't do anything. You always want to eat before you burst, right? If you are gonna burst. And then if you do, what sort of ER requirements are you looking at? Okay, one thing, I don't know if I end up mentioning it later here, but if you have to panic button burst, very often you're not using your E right before it, so you're not pre-funneling particles into your burst, which can make the ER requirements higher if you need to have a panic button again. But I think I do talk about how, like, at the end of the day, it's just there to be a panic button, so you shouldn't build ER. Oh yeah, one thing actually that is really, really nice about doing EQE, 10 pyro particles is a lot of f***ing energy, and it makes it feel so much better to end your rotation without your burst, or like end a chamber without your burst on your other characters if you didn't have to burst on Arlecchino. Because then if you finish a chamber without your burst, but you have Arlecchino's burst, on the next chamber you can EQE and start your rotation by generating 10 pyro particles, which especially when you're playing her with Bennett, which so far has been my experience in most teams I've played her. I mean, it's basically enough to full battery Bennett, right? Like a zero energy Bennett with 200, I mean, that's a lot of ER. I guess not a lot of people are gonna have that much. But even then, right, literally zero energy, Arlecchino, EQE, and we get the burst back. Literally just from Arlecchino EQE. Now, if you have a little bit less ER, you might need to also have a Bennett E, but I think this illustrates the point pretty well. Because her burst isn't part of her optimal damage rotation, isn't as big of a deal, because if you're not doing an optimal damage rotation, it doesn't hurt you as much. I definitely stand by, you shouldn't really build ER. You use your burst when you need the healing, and that's it. Next up, we can talk about her artifact sets. One thing that I didn't end up including here that I guess I should have is the Pavillon set. It's not good, but it is another fine option if you're coping. If you've spent a lot of resin in this domain because you're a Wanderer main and you have a lot of like really good pieces from this, it's usable, but it's not what I'd recommend. I don't think there's anything new or anything that hasn't been mentioned here already to say about any artifact sets, except that honestly, I've gotten a bit less excited about her signature set because it really hit me that my Glad is so good that I'm unlikely to improve my Arlecchino by farming the set by the time 5.0 rolls around. And spending a bunch of patches farming the same domain for, at best, a relatively minor increase seems hard to justify for me. It's definitely worth farming if you don't have the greatest Glad pieces. I will say if you did go for C2, the threshold at which Whimsy is better becomes a lot lower. And by that I mean, because the C2 damage is not normal attack damage, it's still probably not even that great because the C2 hit happens without full stacks of Whimsy, right? I don't think I made my thoughts clear enough in the pre-release about how, while yes, Whimsy is best in slot and it is worth farming if like you really like her, want to main her, whatever, or if you don't have the best Glad to begin with. For a lot of you guys watching, you have good Glad already. You should keep in mind that 5.0 isn't that far away from now, and it's probably going to introduce some new artifact sets that you might want to start farming. And if your Glad is good enough, then it's very possible that by the time 5.0 comes out, your Whimsy is just not better than your Glad, and then all of that time will have been wasted. But if you don't have anything else to be farming, if you don't have any other good use for your resin right now, then it's still something you can do. Anyways, next up, artifact stats. Baseline is going to be attack, pyro, crit. However, there are two main changes that can happen depending on your weapon and team. Those two changes can be an EM Sands and an attack Goblet. Yeah, I mean, there's, again, not really much to say about that. I'm personally not using an EM Sands, even if I think EM Sands is slightly better, just because EM Sands isn't better by a big enough margin to justify having to swap her build every time I play her in a different team. And that's a pain in the ass, and I don't like it. I'd rather just leave her on an attack sand all the time. Anyways, now we're getting into the teams, which is the most important part of the post-release generally. And I think we need to start by talking about Vape, because she's already been and it will continue to be compared to Hu Tao. But the actual difference in output between that and just mashing normal attacks is obviously a lot smaller than the difference in output between charge cancels on Hu Tao and mashing normal attacks. Yeah, in my experience, you kind of just click on the normal attack button until you have to dodge. That's generally the Arlecchino experience, honestly. Because she already gets so much damage percent from her kit and her signature set, and because she doesn't vape almost all of her damage like Hu Tao does, she's a lot less synergistic with the good Anemo units we have. Okay, I think that's the first, I guess, big caveat I want to add. It is true that her synergy with the Anemo units, in terms of how much they increase her damage, is lower, because she doesn't benefit as much from the stats that are given by those units, because she already has a lot of damage percent, and because she doesn't vape as much of her damage as Hu Tao. That being said, her AoE is better than Hu Tao's, and so she benefits from the grouping you can get from the Anemo units more. I don't think I underestimated it that much, but I definitely somewhat underestimated her ability to deal with AoE content. Not just in Vape teams, just in general. The fact that her damage is so front-loaded gives her better synergy with groupers, because usually you group enemies, they stay grouped for a few seconds, and then they do an attack that makes them move. And when your damage profile is very, very front-loaded, then the time for which the enemies are still grouped is when your damage is at its highest. And that's definitely something I overlooked a bit. I've looked at the damage that her teams do, and in my opinion, taking into account the reliance on defensive utility, I think that her general best team is gonna be a zhongli Bennett Vape team. Okay, I don't believe so anymore. I think I've changed my mind on this. I would generally rather play either Sucrose or Kazuha in this slot, but the Hydro slot that I like the most right now may surprise some of you guys. But let's listen to what Pastadev has to say about this first. It's not going to be the highest DPS one. It's effectively because of the anti-synergy that exists between her kit and the Anemo units. But yeah, also about that anti-synergy, while it is true that her being more Bennett reliant means that she likes a Bennett buff more, her front-loaded damage also means that if you swap into her later into your rotation and end up staying on her for less time, you're not losing as much of your damage. And if you're swapping out earlier, you're storing even more Bond of Life and therefore more damage for your next rotation. So I think that's definitely something that I misevaluated. If anything, she may even have more synergy with characters that want to go after Bennett than characters that want to go before. Well, it's not gonna be as much DPS, it's actually not that far behind. But yeah, like it is not that far behind if you are doing the full rotation on a specific rotation, but a lot of the time you're gonna have to dash, you're gonna have to run between enemies. Any sort of thing that delays your damage a little bit is gonna start favoring the teams where you have quote-unquote less time on her, because you're getting even more damage on your next rotation. You can use a defensive utility option like zhongli. Zhongli will be the best defensive utility option, but when you're against freezable enemies, characters like Layla will also be able to do pretty well. And one thing I want to add for Layla is if you're using a slower Hydro application option, you don't want to use Layla's burst because it can actually make it so that you trigger freeze right after you apply Hydro, you melt, then there's no aura on the enemy, and if it's at one of the moments where Arlecchino applies pyro relatively close back to back, you might end up losing out on some vapes, especially once you start getting the faster cryo application from her burst. Plus there's the fact that if you're against non-freezable enemies, then you just lose a vape every time you apply cryo. I haven't tested it too much because my Layla is pretty low level, so her shield doesn't last very long. But I do think Layla is not quite as good with her as I hoped she would be. That being said though, like that is generally only really an issue with the slower Hydro applicators, not with Xingqiu. For the vape teams, I've looked mostly at Bennett, Zhongli Hydro, I've looked at Bennett Anemo Hydro, and I've looked at Bennett Double Hydro, as well as Zhongli Double Hydro. The main thing I want to add for vape is what has actually been my personal favorite vape team to play, and it's with Candace. When you're looking at your Hydro options, Farina doesn't really have reliable AoE application. Neuvillette, not an off-fielder. Nilo, really long animation, pretty slow application, and no benefit outside of the application. Unless maybe if you have a key. Ilan, completely single target application. Ayato, movie length animation, and really high ER requirements. And often unreliable Hydro app because of the RNG in his burst. Child, unless you C4, no off field. Mona, really long animations, really hard to get enough ER to be able to do TDDS on her, and if you're not doing TDDS, then it's like not that good. And the Hydro app doesn't really last long enough for a full rotation, and it's stationary. Xingqiu, mostly single target. And what that means is that when it comes to AoE situations, either you're just accepting that you're not going to vape everything, or you are trying to vape everything, and then you're going to need an AoE Hydro. And the ones that can do it is Farina, but it's not very reliable, and playing 50% HP on Arlecchino it feels awful. Nilo, no real upside. Ayato, ugh. And then you have Barbara, Kokomi, and Candace. Now, Candace only works at C6 in this team. Her application pre-C6 is only when you swap. But at C6, you get application on normal attacks every 2.3 seconds. Now, Barbara has the issue of the AoE being really, really small. Kokomi has the issue of being pretty stationary and actively needing to either wait or do charge attack cancel to even vape your stuff at all. Otherwise, you're going to apply pyro too fast. Candace is a pretty brain-dead option where you just swap into her, do EQ, and then go to Arlecchino. And you can just start hitting him. Obviously, remove a shot is being a little cringe here, but get the idea. Because she doesn't really do a lot of damage, obviously it's going to be a worse option in single target than characters like Xingqiu and Yelan. But this Abyss with triple Kenki, it feels nice to be able to have AoE application. Oh yeah, and then on top of that, the 20% normal attack damage bonus you get, plus the 0.5% per 1000 HP that she has. Mine has 20k, so another 10%. It's actually relevant on Arlecchino. All in all, Candace actually just feels really good to use with Arlecchino. As much ER as possible, might as well put her on 4 Emblem. There we go. You can build HP, but an HP Sans gives you about 2.5% normal attack bonus on Arlecchino. Same for HP Circlet or Goblet. So it's a very, very minor amount of damage. It's not really that necessary, but is what it is. That being said, this is a team that I've been liking the most when it comes to like trying to speedrun stuff or trying to one rotate stuff. But for like just general gameplay, the teams that have some form of defensive utility have definitely felt a lot better to play. When it comes to teams that don't run a dedicated shielder, it generally feels a lot better to play with Xingqiu than with any of the other Hydro units. And when you are running a shielder, you can more easily get away with whatever you want. So I definitely overlooked Candace. I also overlooked all the other like Hydro options that you can use in AoE that aren't necessarily as good as Candace, or that have different upsides. So for different upside, I mean Kokomi. Kokomi can be better than Candace in some situations. She's not burst reliant, which can be nice. You can put Instructor on her, whereas with Candace, you kind of need to get too much ER, and that's a lot harder to do on Instructor. She can wear TDDS. That makes the overall buff that she gives a bit better than Candace's, but obviously in exchange for that, you're stationary. But obviously, also, Candace is a relatively new 4-star, and as such, not a lot of people have her C6, whereas everyone who has Kokomi has Kokomi. But yeah, and then you can also use Ayato, you can use Barbara, which actually surprised me. Barbara, as long as you don't get staggered, because that can, mess with your timing a little bit, Barbara can actually apply enough Hydro, and obviously she can also use both Instructor and TTDS, just like Kokomi. I'm not trying to show the damage, I didn't even let it cook fully, but just trying to show that the aura does get maintained. But obviously then you run into second rotation, and then you're like, okay, Pog, woohoo, I'm ready, woohoo. Oops, oh my god, I didn't. And even waiting like an hour at the end there, I still didn't have my E back up, because the cooldown is very, very long, right? It's fine if you can one rotate content, or if you don't mind just waiting or having one quote-unquote mono pyro rotation every other rotation. Or you can just use Sac Fry on Barbara, but then you don't have TDDS, so it's kind of like, eh. But yeah, Barbara is definitely a less premium option over Candace and Kokomi. And yeah, Ayato, unironically, the biggest issue is just, it's really rough to get a Pyro Swirl through his burst. You can't really start with his burst, and his burst animation is so long that you'll basically end up with no uptime left if you use him. Anyways, let's keep going, move on to the other teams. He can be played in things other than Vape, and that's her biggest advantage over Hu Tao, because that is definitely her biggest advantage. And while so far the teams that I've gravitated towards the most have been the Vape teams, I have actually played her a decent amount in non-Vape teams as well. I mean, for example, in the Vibro Crystal event, I played her basically only in Mono Pyro. A character that can just work on basically any team archetype with Pyro is just nice to have. It's nice that there's a character that isn't pigeonholed into only one comp. For example, you have Chevreuse Overload teams. I'm going to be separating the Chevreuse teams in Chevreuse Double Electro and Chevreuse Bennett. Yeah, okay, so just to elaborate on this, you could play Chevreuse 1 Electro and then Toma or Yunfei or I guess Xianyun or like Deya, but those teams are noticeably worse. The biggest weakness with Chevreuse teams is not how strong they are, it's how much they have to sacrifice for defensive utility options. There is just no unit that slots in as a defensive utility option that doesn't completely gimp your damage, other than Beidou. But as much as Beidou is nice defensive utility, for a character that can't heal, it won't necessarily be enough. On top of that, Beidou feels a lot worse in single target than she does in AoE. I think that as a general rule, I would almost always prefer running Beidou to Thoma in Chevreuse teams for Arlecchino. Yeah, like, it's not necessarily that, like, if I am playing Chevreuse Arlecchino, I would always rather play Thoma over, or Beidou over Thoma, because obviously, if Beidou's defensive utility isn't enough, then it's not like you have much of a choice, right? But if your Chevreuse team is gonna be Chevreuse Thoma, I'd rather just not play a Chevreuse team, I guess is what I was trying to articulate, and I don't think I articulated it well enough. I guess I should also include Xianyun double Hydro. I hate the plunge Arlecchino teams. It feels like you're going through 80,000 hoops to have worse performances. I think it used to be a lot more of a consideration in her earlier beta versions because she was just worse, and so having Xianyun put her on her back and carry her felt a bit better, or would have felt better rather. But now with the changes she got, she is actually a good unit now, so putting her on Xianyun's back doesn't feel as necessary, and she doesn't actually have good synergy with Xianyun to begin with. Chevreuse teams, and overall one of her stronger teams. And yeah, I'm going at this with the assumption that Chevreuse C6 works. Next up, Mono Pyro. Yeah, so I think when I recorded this, we didn't have banners yet, so I didn't know if Chevreuse was going to be on her banner. Obviously, as it turns out, she isn't, which means I still don't have Chevreuse on my account. So all the testing I've done on Chevreuse teams have been on other people's accounts. So I can't really speak to like how much I would have ended up playing her with Chevreuse if I did have her. But I don't think I would have ended up playing her that much. Having experienced Arlecchino in Mono Pyro and Vape teams, I don't feel like I'm missing out on that much not having Chevreuse on my account. It's one of the teams you can do for sure, and it's a good one, but the amount that you have to sacrifice in order to be able to slot in defensive utility is definitely enough of a roadblock that it doesn't feel like I'm missing out on much. The Mono Pyro teams where you're playing Bennett, Kazuha, Xiangling don't have a shield option, but you can just use zhongli as a shield, or even TTDS Yanfei. Okay, overall, so talking about zhongli, there is one thing I want to mention, and it was a lot easier to notice in the previous Abyss than it is in this one, I guess. So, here's what I wanted to show. Being able to use Zhongli's burst like this, oh my. Bruh. So, as I was trying to show, but I'm an idiot, so I f***ed it up. If you crowd control them, and you use your Zhongli burst... Okay, why is it flying that way? It's just doing it to be funny now! Whatever. You can petrify them in place and then start hitting them, and because your damage is very front-loaded... I didn't even 3-star, whatever. Editor, if you can find the clip from last Abyss, you can put it in.
Order guide. Stabilize.
Overrule. Let's light it up. Teamwork is...
Wait, I got this kinda popping off. Bro, this is gonna be a pretty strong Mono Pyro team. Yeah, Mono Pyro good. I wanna quickly mention Burgeon. Burgeon just isn't great for Pyro carries. Yeah, I don't like Burgeon. Burgeon is a very high damage reaction, so it has a high floor, and Arlecchino is a good unit. So even if an Arlecchino Burgeon team is not really either a good Burgeon team or a good Arlecchino team, it is gonna be a good enough overall team to be playable. If you really want to play Burgeon, you can, but it's definitely not something I'd recommend. Speaking of her AoE, and I guess bringing it back to Hu Tao, I know a lot of people are gonna be like, oh, she's Hu Tao but AoE, and no, she's not. I will say, we have had data mined leaks today that they're increasing her AoE. So this is like massive. They did. The increase on her AoE definitely is something that, you know, makes her a bit better in AoE content and better in AoE teams for sure. It is a bit bigger than Hu Tao's AoE, but not significantly so. Yeah, I think the main thing is like when you're playing with a grouper, because her damage is so front loaded, even a relatively small AoE is generally still gonna be enough. At least for the very, very start, and that's where most of your damage happens. It's definitely something you're gonna feel if you're playing in AoE content without a grouper, except, I guess, against stuff like Kenki, where you can manipulate their AI to get them grouped anyways. But, like, if you're playing second side of this Abyss without a grouper, it does not feel like she has any AoE here. Like, it's definitely something that is very noticeable. But that doesn't mean there are no situations in which her AoE matters. And I definitely think the buffs to her AoE ended up being relatively significant when it comes to her overall team versatility. Not her team versatility, but the versatility that her teams get when it comes to content where they can be good. I know some people are going to want to know about Chiori. You can play like Bennett zhongli Chiori or Yelan zhongli Chiori or Sing Soil zhongli Chiori. That's something you can do. It's fine. I mean, basically all the Yoimiya teams. It's pretty good. I agree with the words, but I think the expression and intonation I used made it seem a bit worse than it actually is. Like, it is definitely one of her good teams. When you're playing OverVape, right, you're generally going to be using Fischl, maybe Fischl Beto. They're not necessarily the best of her teams, but they're going to be reasonable if you don't have the... I didn't end up testing this very much, because honestly, I don't think there's much to test. It's an alright team. I mean, I've already talked about Xianyun double Hydro. You can also do Xianyun Bennett with Hydro. It'll be pretty good. Yeah, editor used Yelan here because I didn't actually say which Hydro units, but generally this would more be with Farina. But yeah, these teams just feel like ass to play. I truly despise them. They make me angry. They make me sad. They make me upset. No, say no. Say no to plunging. Wait, what's that meme of like, fuck? I don't remember the exact words, so my brain is like struggling to come up with a good way to explain it. But it's like, how do they convince us that this thing was fine, this new thing was fine, the old thing better? Fuck! I need an example! Chat! Editor, don't cut this out. Please! Please! I'm begging! It's like the stop. Yes! Yes! Wait, stop doing math. Yeah! This is the one! Stop doing maths. Numbers were not supposed to be given names. Years of counting, yet no real world use found for going higher than your fingers. Wanted to go higher anyways for a laugh? We had a tool for that. It was called guessing. I need this meme, but stop doing plunge. Editors, you have to make this for the video. I'm giving you homework. Stop doing plunge attacks. I hate it. Don't do it. Yeah, I guess we can talk quickly about Melt. Melt, I don't expect to be very good with her. I think Melt is better than I anticipated. Let's start by listening to Ulta Passage. Like just straight, like Vape Melt, like as in using a cryo unit in a Vape team, that's gonna be fine. But straight to Melt without a Hydro unit, I don't think it's gonna be very good. The Blood Debt Directive damage over time effect can screw over some of your setups. Yeah, so these are the words of a clueless, stupid man. As it turns out, her elemental skill has special ICD where the second hit, which happens 5 seconds after the first one, does not apply pyro. Right? This next hit, dealt damage, did not apply pyro. So as it turns out, these setups are that I thought would be pretty much like meme, like speedrun only, whatever. They work. Anyways, Melt teams still aren't great because at the end of the day, you're not vaping all your damage. You're only vaping a certain portion of it. And that obviously means that you're not doubling your damage from Melt. But you are getting, 15 crit rate from Cryo Resonance. There's a decent amount of cryo units that have some nice, useful buffs. Right, Rosario's got the crit rate buff. Diona's got EM buff. They generally tend to perform worse than the Vape teams, but they are definitely playable and viable teams. Generally, you're gonna have to run double cryo. In my testing, the only one I could get to reliably apply enough cryo solo is Kea, but that only works at C6. Obviously lost a bit of damage because started hitting it before it got up completely, but you get the idea. Other than that, generally it's more worth to just run double cryo. Depending on the cryo unit, sometimes you're gonna have to dash cancel the charge attack like I did. I think with KSC6 you don't have to, as assuming everything goes properly, as you're going to get a cryo application right after the charge attack if you don't have to dodge, just from the default timing. But yeah. Overall, I think Melt teams are really mostly either because you're trying to do a very specific thing, you're trying to play a specific unit or whatever, or because you just don't have the units that are good for Vape, or they're busy on the other side. Two things I want to warn you guys about. One, if you're playing her in Overworld, you can E, let it cook, catch the mark, teleport, come back, E, let it cook, catch the mark, and start your rotation with 200 Bond of Life instead of 130. Which means that showcases on day one are going to lie to you. If the whole health bar is red, they cheated. Number two, her damage is very front-loaded. A lot of her damage happens early on while she has a lot of Bond of Life. Because of that, it's gonna feel like she does more damage than she actually does. Front load is an upside, right? A unit doing the same damage but doing it earlier is better. And that upside will be felt, especially once you start reaching moments where you can either, or like when you clear the enemy before the end of a rotation. But that also means that the numbers you see on the first hit aren't really representative of the numbers that she's consistently doing throughout her uptime. Oh yeah, actually, one more thing I want to mention. Both Last Abyss and this Abyss have kind of insane Abyss blessings for Arlecchino. So even what I've shown in this video, anytime I went in Abyss, those numbers are inflated. 30% res shred for free is a lot. So keep in mind these numbers are inflated by the blessing. They are not representative of what you're going to get in Abysses that aren't tailored to sell her. Anyways, I think that's gonna do it. Overall, pretty strong character. Not game-breaking, but definitely has enough upsides that there are reasons to go for her over some of the other pyro carries. I don't think that she's overall better than Hu Tao. I think overall she's weaker. But there will definitely be situations where she's preferable. Yeah, I think, I guess the argument for her being better than Hu Tao would boil down to people that are generally interested enough in min-maxing to learn Hu Tao's cancels tend to be more likely to either reach just the artifact investment and like team setup investment required to one-rotate content, in which case her front-loaded is more valuable than, or makes her more valuable than Hu Tao, or are going to pull for constellations or signature weapon, and obviously she also is ahead of Hu Tao in that department. And I think that the overall discussion is a bit closer than I made it seem in this video. Like, I still think that I would probably rather have Hu Tao on my account if I had to choose between the two from a purely meta perspective. But I also don't really like Hu Tao, and I actually like Arlecchino. So in practice, if you ask me to choose between the two, I'd rather have Arlecchino. Alright, so that's gonna be it for the post release. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you learned a thing or two. As usual, leave a like, subscribe, all the good YouTube stuff. Check me out on Twitch, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.